Hi, I'm Charlotte from the Wales Network. I'm in Year 12, and our five panelists today are Kate Moody, Ian Cable, and an intern, Oliver, Sarah, and yeah, I think that's it. Now, if you could each introduce yourself and speak for about 5 minutes about your studies, career, role, etc., that'd be great. Thank you so much. Can we start with Kate Moody?
Yep, thanks for having me on here, everyone. My name is Kate and I work as a climate change officer in Wigan Council. Wigan Council is in the northwest of England, very near Manchester, and we serve over 300,000 residents, and we have about 5,000 staff. And my role is primarily on the strategy side of climate action. So essentially it's getting to net zero as fast as possible. And in line with the rest of the other boroughs in Greater Manchester, our aim is to get to net zero by 2038 and influence the borough to do the same. So as part of my role, basically pushing the climate crisis as one of the number one priorities is definitely up there. So it takes a lot of communication and engagement with senior staff and sort of trying to persuade people in the urgency of acting on climate crisis. We tried to build this action into every service, so climate change not being a standalone issue, but the one that affects everyone. General upskilling, so I deliver training, I send out a bi-weekly newsletter that talks about different sort of policy updates and news updates, and then really strengthening the climate crisis is a major factor in decision making. So in councils we make all sorts of decisions every single day that affect probably more aspects of your life than you would realise, and making the climate crisis as a major factor in that is really, really important. So I work on the sort of strategic side, and then other members of my team work a bit more engagement. So we've got someone who works with community groups and engaging them, and another who works in school education and engagement. And how I got into this role was like not really a linear way. My study was in psychology, and then for quite a few years I worked as a researcher and a data analyst for the private sector. I ended up working in Wigan Council after that, and it was while I was working at Wigan Council that I really got to know a bit more about what was going on with the climate crisis, and I got a bit more involved in the activism side of things, and then that kind of in a roundabout way led me to my role. So I don't actually have any formal training, and I would say that my kind of role as a generalist, as a climate change officer, is really much more about the softer skills. So your ability to communicate with people, your ability to influence people, and things like that. And then I just wanted to talk just really quickly about why I think it's so important to work at a council, because I think that, with COP27 going on, and we talk a lot about what central government's doing, but actually the solutions to climate change and the impacts of climate change are felt at a really local level. And about half of the cuts that we need to have come from people and businesses, and those decisions are made at a local level. And working in a council, we actually have the power to influence about a third of emissions in our local area. So we have powers to ensure buildings meet energy efficiency standards. We have planning powers over buildings and transport. We've got powers to protect the environment and wildlife and heritage. And then we also deal with disposal and recycling of waste. So we have a really big leadership role. We can communicate directly with people and communities, and then really we can prepare people for the impacts of climate change, because the needs for adaptive measures are specific to each area. And then lastly, we can be really responsive, and we can act more quickly than local government, and really create the positive change that we need. We need communities on board, and we need to build consensus. So that's just a little bit of a sort of like whistle stop tour about how I got into working for a council, and why I think it's, if you want to feel like you're making real change, it's a really, really good place to do this kind of work.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. Next, we're going to hand over to Ian.
Hi, yeah, thanks very much for having me. Yeah, my name's Ian Cable. I work at the Environment Agency and I volunteer for Collective for Climate Action. My kind of climate story started when I was working for the Environment Agency, just doing buildings management stuff. I got a degree in zoology and didn't manage to use it in any way, shape or form. So while I was there, I found out about master's degrees in climate change. And so I went back to Exeter to study that for a year. And after that, I got my master's and came back to the Environment Agency, where I thought I would never be again. But everyone seems to come back when they leave. It's a great place to work. Yeah, I worked in flood risk mapping for a while then. And I also worked in flood resilience after that. So flood risk mapping is mapping flood extents and going out and doing flood reconnaissance after flood events. It was down in Devon. I was based in Exeter. After that, I worked in flood resilience, which was a community engagement role. And in my professional work, I would say that's about the best role I had. It was going into communities and talking to them about, the flood risk that they had experienced as well. They'd experienced events, and we go in and help them to build flood plans to help make their community resilient to flooding, so they could, deal with it better and recover from it faster. So yeah, I did that for a couple of years, and then I moved to Bristol and started working for the Environment Agency again, after thinking I wouldn't come back to the Environment Agency. And I worked in waste permitting there for 3 years. And that was a really interesting lesson, actually, because I learned that one of the most important things that you can do in terms of helping the environment is to stop businesses from destroying it. And I was talking to a colleague when I was in that department who'd come from the private sector. She just finished her master's degree in environment management, and she said that when she finished that or started that degree, the coordinator was saying to her, if you're here to save the environment, then you're in the wrong place. Many of you will be doing jobs helping private sectors to navigate the regulatory system and allow them to pollute within the realms of the law. And so we would often get, that's not the case for all environment officers. I mean, people are in being environmental consultants, but it's certainly, those are the people who we dealt with in waste permitting in the regulatory sector every day. And a lot of them would come and work for us to be on the other side of the fence. So yeah, I did that for 3 years, and now I work in complaints handling for the Environment Agency. So I'm gone further and further away from doing anything in my professional capacity as with regards to climate change. But now it was in that role that I started making some noise on our social media platforms internally, and I got snapped up. I think Sarah was one of the people I spoke to first about all of this kind of stuff a few years ago now. So thanks for that. And yeah, and since then, I was one of the people making noise about climate change when our chief executive and chair and stuff would come and talk at the Environment Agency. There weren't many people talking about it then. So, and I was getting frustrated by nothing really happening or nothing seeming to happen. But over the last 5 or 6 years, I've seen things to really, really change. So the conversation in the Environment Agency, for example, is very, very, very centered around climate change, which is really good to see. And now, obviously, with the CFCA, I work kind of communicating climate change, going to schools, talk to community groups, and I'm the education lead. So we put on events, host like experts on climate change to talk about the work they're doing with regards to climate solutions and talk about where we are with climate change. Yeah, help organize the work that we do, try and recruit people. I do a bit of everything, really. Yeah, so that's me.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hand over to Oliver.
Yeah, hi, I'm Oliver. So I'm currently a part-time master's student at King's College London, and I studied climate change and environmental policy. At the CFCA, so I joined the Collective for Climate Action in 2020 during lockdown. It's quite a blur. I can't really remember much apart from joining the CFCA. And since then, I've mainly been helping co-lead the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. And my current project is around designing these workshops for public sector civil servants and public civil servants about how they can put ideas such as intersectionality and positionality into practice. These are big theories that I've learned during my course at uni, and I feel like they offer so much value for climate justice and climate action. However, I've seen that there's a big sort of gap or divide between university research and actual local authorities, councils, government departments, all that stuff. So I see these workshops as a sort of space to sort of help bridge that divide, because climate change, as we all probably know by now, it's a very diverse issue, the various different drivers, and also various different ways we can tackle it. And so therefore we need as much collaboration as possible. And that was one of the like driving forces or motivators for why I wanted to start these workshops. I'm also a volunteer with the Environmental Investigation Agency. That is different to the Environment Agency. People sometimes I get confused with it as well. And I've helped them with, so I'm half Chinese, and I can use my Mandarin skills to help them with researching China's response to the Montreal Protocol on the substances that deplete the ozone layer. And through that role, I've learned so much, a lot of stuff I haven't covered in my degree so far. And there's a lot of advantages to ozone protection that will benefit climate action. And it has already staved off a lot of warming too. So if you want to learn more about that, feel free to look at the Environmental Investigation Agency's work. And yeah, so I guess career-wise, so I don't actually work in the public sector at the moment. I intend to in the future. So my like definition of the public sector is quite maybe different to someone who might works in it. But I generally see it as any sector that isn't private sector. And yeah, and I've career-wise, I'd be interested in something around ensuring social and ecological justice for people, animals, and nature. And yeah, happy to talk about any questions that people ask.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Next up will be Martha.
Hi everyone, I'm Martha. I'm an intern with the Environment Agency. I've been here for about 4 months now. I'm on the Sustainable Business team at the moment, which is the one that's sort of responsible for the net zero plan. I'm on the sort of sub team that works on circular economy. So currently doing data analysis to collect information about all the resources that the Environment Agency uses so that we can try and reduce waste and use resources much more efficiently. I'm also on the diversity internship, so I'm trying to sort of link up and talk a lot about the intersectionality between race and climate justice and stuff like that. I'm a recent graduate. I graduated in September, so I feel still very attached to school and education. I graduated from UCL. I did a master's in natural sciences, focusing on chemistry and maths, and sort of like never had any education on climate change or climate science or anything like that. So for my master's project, I developed a proposal for embedding sustainability into chemistry degrees, which is now being taken forward into like broader STEM degrees and hopefully beyond that. And that was a really great way for me to like channel all my frustration and eco-anxiety into a project that now is hopefully like going to affect students and support teachers in like in talking about climate in schools and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm still very, very new to the Environment Agency, but there is lots of cool work going on. And like even since I started, there are so many conversations happening, and like tomorrow I'm going back into UCL to talk to teachers about ways, like practical ways that they can talk about sustainability in the classroom and stuff like that. And when I was a student, I was involved in a lot of that sort of volunteering stuff. I was working with SUS UK, the Students Organising for Sustainability in the Green Impact Scheme. And it's just been really great to read all of your responses in the chat. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you more. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mark.
I think you're on mute, Alexander.
Sorry, we've just got one more speaker.
Yeah, can we hear from Sarah, please?
Hi, Charlotte. Hi, everybody. It's Sarah, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so excited to be here. I feel really honoured to have been invited, so thank you very much. I work for Natural England. We are the government advisor on nature conservation. So for us, the climate and nature crisis is inextricably linked, and what we mainly do is try and think about how we tackle those the extreme kind of degradation of our natural environment in England that we've presided over many decades, and try to try to kind of get into a position where we're recovering nature, but where climate change action is very much part of that. I work in a small team within Natural England, and a lot of the work that I do, I focus particularly on adaptation. Others in my team focus on mitigation, which is the kind of net zero agenda and what nature can do for that. Clearly, we work very well together in terms of integrating those actions. But both parts of the team work on how to take evidence from climate change, the fact that what's happening to our climate, what impacts and vulnerabilities that then puts onto our natural environment, and how we need to recover nature and how we need to adapt nature or allow nature to become more adaptable as we move on, how putting in place naturally functioning ecosystems, taking away all of those pressures as well as climate change that we've put onto our natural environment. We do that by taking all the evidence and information and trying to think about how we can provide training and resources and support for all across the organization and all of the work areas that we cover. And that will be things like our protected sites and species, the way we farm our land that might be better for nature, the way that planning and development interact with the natural environment. And so the work that I do focuses on providing that information, providing that embedding, writing our adaptation plan and climate change strategy for the organization, thinking about the kinds of other resources. So we have a climate change adaptation manual that's available online. You can go and have a look at that. What kind of resources in that we can provide in terms of vulnerability assessments, in terms of spatial data that will help you map and look at how vulnerability or climate change resilience and adaptability plays out across a landscape. As well as thinking about nature-based solutions for people. So how nature can help us to adapt to climate change and help us mitigate climate change, because of course the natural environment is our life support system, and that's, no nature, no people. In terms of how I got here, I live in Kent, but I'm from West London, so I went to school in West London and I went through my GCSEs and A-levels. I came straight out of there into university. I went to Southampton University. I did a geography degree, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I came out of university, so I did lots of other things for a little while. I always knew that I felt that our impacts on the natural world and the way we treat other beings on this planet wasn't right, and I knew I wanted to do something to do with nature and other beings. So eventually I saved up and I went back to university and I did a master's in wildlife management and conservation. And my first job that brought me to Kent was with Kent County Council. So I know some of the stuff that Kate was talking about in terms of what councils do and how broad that remit is and how important it is. And luckily for me, I was working on a lot of planning things, so developments and planning permissions and how they impact on the natural environment. But I was also involved in an Interreg project called Branch, which looked at how nature will respond to climate change, how ecological networks could be better reinstated or recovered or replaced in order to allow that adaptive capacity. That brought me into the climate change adaptation world. I then moved to Natural England. That was 13 years ago. And I work on a national role with the National Climate Change team within Natural England. And we work with a wide range of partners, our local authority partners, the Environment Agency and Forestry Commission. We work closely with DEFRA to try and advise government on their policy making. We work across a very broad remit. And we're about to, one of my colleagues is a COP lead, an IPCC lead author. So we have some really influential people that we work with, that I work with closely and that we have within our organization. And my colleague is going to COP went to last year's COP and it is going again next week. So we're really kind of in the heart of this work.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you so much to all 5 of our panelists. That was absolutely fantastic. And we really got to hear about sort of a wide range of careers. I love at sort of this point to encourage all students to, and staff as well, if you want, to send questions to any of our panelists in the chat. I know that you must all have some really, really burning ones you want to get off your chest. I certainly do. And bearing that in mind, I'm going to sort of steal the first question slot, which, if that's okay, I'm going to direct at Martha. You spoke a lot about how your work sort of included intersectionality and the environment. And I was wondering if sort of, just while people were putting their questions in the chat as well, you'd be able to explain a bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if people have heard of systems thinking. It's basically just this idea of not solving problems in a very linear approach. We've just like, I've got a problem, this is how we're going to fix it. And in sustainability, it's very much, we've got a problem, but if we fix it that way, we're going to make it worse in that way. And we need to think about not just carbon, we need to think about water, and we need to think about communities and all of these things. And we have to think about the system holistically. The sort of intersectionality, and I think where I think diversity is so important here. I mean, it's important everywhere to have a diversity of approach and of thought, and that comes with having diversity of backgrounds and all of that stuff. That's all important because, like, for me, so like my family, I'm half Vietnamese, and a lot of Vietnam is going to flood. Like, it's just not going to be habitable, and that's the same for a lot of people who have family in the global south. And so then my approach to and like emotional response to climate change is very different to someone who doesn't have that family background. And so having people who have that sort of like drive, have this understanding of the realities of climate change, I think is so important, so that we don't just sit here as very privileged people who are I'm sitting in London, like, I'm fine right now, but I haven't had to experience flooding. I haven't had to experience, you know, apart from this summer, a lot of drought or heat waves or any of these climate impacts that are happening right now, but just not to me. And so having that diversity and other people coming in and saying, actually, this isn't a problem for future generations, like, we're suffering with this now, is really important. And I saw some people in the chat talk about getting that sort of like listening to Indigenous voices at COP, and it's that sort of thing as well, of just listening to everyone's experiences.
Thank you so much. I think that's really, really insightful. It's sort of really easy for us to kind of sit here, sort of being from a very kind of liberal Western democracy and be in a position of privilege and sort of perhaps expect change whilst negating and invalidating those experiences of other people from other parts of the world. So sort of thank you for sharing that with us. Next up, we have a question from Alec in Oxford in year 12. This one is for Ms. Moody. And Alec asks, would you consider the council you work for to be all for climate action we need? And if so, is there anything holding you back from making the changes that sort of you feel would be necessary? And do you think this is the same in other councils and other areas?
That's a really good question. So I would say that broadly, yes, the council is for the climate action we need, but there are lots of barriers that stop it from happening as quickly as I would like to see it. So one of the main barriers is financial. You know, we have to bid for money, so we have to compete with other councils for money, and some you know, sometimes you can win, sometimes you can lose, and even when you win that money, you might not be able to spend it in the way that you want. So one of the things that we want from central government is to have access to money that you know, we don't have to spend it in like a really, really quick way, and we don't have to spend it in a competitive way. Another thing that maybe is holding us back is that you know, there's probably a general lack of awareness about the like true urgent nature of the climate crisis. That's why a lot of what my team does is about communicating that urgency with people and really like trying to upskill people. And do I think it's the same in other areas of the councils? I think that some of them are better than others. So some of them are really, really ambitious, and they're really sort of leading the way for the rest of us, and then some maybe just don't have that. They don't have the finances, they don't have the capacity. But yeah, I know in councils there's a lot of very, very passionate people who really, really care about their local areas. So it's just trying to sort of yeah, get that as being the top priority.
Thank you so much, Kate. I have a question for Sarah. Do you think rewilding has a role in nature-based solutions to climate change?
Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, I do. I really do. I think that we, as I described, we've spent a lot of time damaging our natural environment, removing it, polluting it, degrading it. And we don't ever need to go backwards. We need to go forwards into something better than we have now. And I definitely think that rewilding, or bringing back those naturally functioning systems, creating the kind of different levels of biodiversity, different connections between biodiversity and those physical systems and habitats, is really important. So things like our food chains and food webs, things have been taken out of those. That ability of geomorphology, of naturally functioning dynamic systems to do what they need to do. So for example, at the coast or in river systems, we've constrained a lot of things with walls and engineering, and often for good reason. We don't want people to be flooded, but we know better now that we can have a much more natural functioning system that will help us to get all the things we need, like food and water and protection, but that they will also allow nature to thrive as well, and allow us to access and enjoy that amazing nature. Sometimes the vocabulary is difficult, so some people find the word rewilding a difficult word. There's a big old discussion about that. I personally like it. I'd like to see our countryside or our country much more wild and free. But the other ways to describe it is nature recovery, or those naturally functioning systems, or more nature, better, bigger, joined up nature, and all of that going in that right direction, removing those access barriers for people, creating that wonderful biodiversity, putting it near to where everybody can access it, and bringing back some of our lost species, like we have been doing with the beaver, which is a really exciting thing to see. So yeah, it does have absolutely a role, and I'd like to see much more.
Thank you so much. I think there's another question for you from the chat, asking you if you could possibly expand a bit on the ways climate change and climate mitigation and adaptation are linked.
Yeah, sure. So particularly for the natural environment, what the sort of three things that we work on, I suppose, is that degraded natural system that we have. We need to recover it, and we need to allow it to be more adaptable. That dynamic process we need to allow to happen. So and there's also some pretty specific things that we're going to need to help our nature do in order to allow it to adapt. So in the past, when we had a really big proper functioning system, it would adapt on its own. It would do what it needed to do. We need to help nature do that. And then the other two parts of it are about nature-based solutions or nature-based adaptation and mitigation. And that's where it helps us, and helps us to adapt, and helps us as a global community to bring down those emissions. So nature can store carbon. So for example, in a forest or in a peat, in our peatlands, if you degrade them or ruin them or destroy them, they emit all of that carbon and methane into the atmosphere. So first of all, we need to keep that in the ground, and we need to recover this nature, plant more trees, have more wonderful woodlands, recover and restore our peatlands in order to draw down or sequester carbon and other greenhouse gases into our natural environments. And all of our natural habitats do that carbon storage and sequestration to varying levels, and we've got a report on it. If anyone wants to see it, I can share the link. But what we want to do is have land doing lots of things all in an integrated and multifunctional way. So when we restore our peatlands, or when we plant a woodland, we want it to be biodiverse. We want it to do those nature-based solutions. We want it to be adaptable for nature. So that's where they kind of come together and need to be integrated.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Next up, we have a question for Ian from the chat. Are there any tips that you would give to getting a job or career in reconstituting the environment?
It's one thing I'd say is that there's loads, because it's a bit like what it was like when my parents were getting jobs in the 1970s. Like there is, like in the climate world, there is a massive amount of room. Like it's really expanding now. And there's so many different ways that you can work in this space. The Environment Agency, I'm not sure what it's like for Natural England, but the Environment Agency is quite a strange place in that most people, they end up getting permanent jobs here by being temps. So it seems like a bit of a strange way to get into organizations, but something like 40% of people who work in the Environment Agency start as a temp, and they do just any old job in the Environment Agency. That's how I started, and I know lots of other people have done that as well. But there's many routes in, and you don't need to have an environmental science degree or anything that's really, really specifically to do with conservation or anything like that. Once you get into the organization, there's loads of ways that you can have an impact on, you know, climate and environment, with different having taken very left field paths. Yeah, but from my own perspective, I'm a case in point where I've now shied away from working in a job which is actually to do with the environment, and all of my work on this issue has become volunteer-led. I'm not currently looking for a job in environmental work, simply because one of the main things that we're doing in the Collective for Climate Action is trying to connect the public sector on climate change. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, we've engaged with people like Kate and councils. We've got 250 councils, I think, represented on the Cross Government Climate Hub, and over 100 public sector organisations. And it's a massive melting pot of ideas and opportunities. And as I say, the Environment Agency is growing its staff on the climate side of things. So the opportunities in these areas should be growing, but there's loads of different ways to make a difference on climate. For example, there's a question about energy. I bang on about energy quite a lot. So one of the areas that we really, really need people to make a difference is in having heat pump engineers. We have a shortage to the tune of about 10,000 people in the UK in that particular sector. So there's an argument for how best can you make an impact on environmental issues, and going back to the waste side of things, preventing the destruction of the atmosphere and the biosphere are you know, two really key ways that we can make a difference on these issues. And there are loads of different roles that you can have an impact by doing that, rather than you know, you can, like, it's quite counterintuitive to think that sitting behind a desk and writing permits for waste companies would be one of the single most powerful things you can do. But at the moment, if people are happy to do that kind of work, then we are always going to have a shortage of people doing that, because environmental regulation it's not going to go anywhere. It may tighten up, hopefully it will continue, I'm sure it will. But yeah, we've got a shortage. I can't remember what the numbers are, but it's really significant. There's a massive drive for people, permitting officers at the Environment Agency at the moment. So there's loads of ways in. Mine is completely random. As I say, I'm not getting paid to do any of this work at the moment, but I do have a job that's very flexible. And when I first started the Environment Agency, I was told that if you don't find the job you want, then create the job you want to do. And in many ways, I'm kind of doing that, because my job's very flexible. So I get to have meetings on climate policy, net zero policy, with people from loads of different organizations all around the country, and different organizations in the public sector and charities. It's not to do with my job specifically, but now there's the flexibility within your role in the Environment Agency, certainly, and lots of other public sector organizations, that I can just work flexibly in the day and have those meetings when other people are working, and engage with loads of different organizations. So my advice is do what you want to do at the moment. And there are going to be roles for people who are technically proficient, good with their hands, you know, good communicators, good writers, good speakers. It's just, this is going to be kind of a systemic change. It's already started. So pursue your passion that you're really good at. And yeah, you can bend that to fit. There's loads of work going on with climate change at the moment.
Right, so I just want to follow that up very quickly. Is there any opportunity, do you think, you mentioned earlier, people go into sort of corporate jobs in like environmental based positions, and you were told that you're sort of just helping companies kind of commit climate or commit damage to the climate within the boundaries of the law. Do you think there's any chance that people who go into those roles can have any positive impact whatsoever, or do you think that point is null and void?
That may well have been a very cynical point of view from a course coordinator on a master's degree of one person that I met while I was doing my waste permitting job. But I know one of my colleagues who I went to university with studied climate change. He works for an environmental consultancy and they focus solely on climate change and carbon accounting. So one of my other colleagues, he works for he works for an environmental consultancy, and now they regulate wind turbine, or they do bids for wind turbine projects. And people have gone to councils with environmental science degrees, working in the corporate environment. We're in this world, it's a contentious issue that we were talking about earlier with like Sarah and Martha and Oliver and I earlier. But yeah, about the idea of greenwashing and stuff. Loads of companies, and you can see this throughout the public sector as well, like in those kind of policy and those net zero meetings that I've been lucky enough to go to, you can see that there are departments across the public sector, certainly, and it's also happening. I know Heather, one of our colleagues in the CFCA who works at the Energy Savings Trust, she talks about this as well. There are people working on net zero targets, carbon reduction commitments in any large company you seek to look at. So the shift is changing, and that conversation I had, that would have been someone attending a master's at least 8 or 9 years ago. And the one thing that we can say about the space that we're in now is it looks very, very different compared to the one that we were in 8 or 9 years ago. Going back to the energy side of things, the shift is absolutely massive, and thinking about what, we're going through a difficult time at the moment with regards to the energy crisis, and that's definitely fed by renewable energy. One of the things that we've done is we've just simply not committed enough in terms of investing in renewables fast enough. So that's left us with an energy deficit. And it's also to do with the way we price energy. Basically, the most expensive form of energy is the one that guides the price of every single type of energy that we bid for every day. So it happens every day. And it's because gas, that represents single-digit percentages of our energy mix, has been really, really expensive, that is causing the price to go so high. And there's all sorts of clever ideas. People at UCL actually are working on policy suggestions for the government to try and sort that out. But at the moment, if you're a renewable energy company, you're making a lot of money because you're selling your energy, which you need no fuel to create, just maintenance costs and raw material costs to build the actual infrastructure. You're making a lot of money at the moment because the energy price is really, really high. And that's great for the renewables industry. But at the moment, it's making it very, very difficult for everyone to pay their bills. But arguably, at the moment, the International Energy Agency is talking about, for the next 5 years, 98 or 96% of all energy added to global energy mix is going to be renewable energy. If you look at all the energy that's been added to India for the last 6 months, that is all clean energy, so nuclear, renewables like solar and wind. China is looking to double its renewable capacity in the next 5 years. That's the tune of the same amount of renewable energy that we've got times 16 that they're going to be adding to their grid in 5 years. So we need to transition really quickly, and once that happens, all of that energy is going to be produced simply for the cost of building the actual infrastructure. So building the cables, building the turbines. No fuel is going to be needed for any of that. And to talk about the massive shift that's going to represent to our society, us having much, much cheaper energy, it's a few decades off. But when you think about us having really, really cheap energy, then things that seem like conservation efforts, they start to become very, very possible, but are completely inconceivable now, simply because we'll have the time to do it and the energy to do it because it's so cheap.
Thank you so much, Ian. I have a quick question for Oliver. Could you perhaps explain a little bit more about your role as Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Lead?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I was just ending my comment on the chat. Anything specific or just general in general?
Does that relate to climate change or in any way?
Yeah, so it's very relevant to climate change. So the basis of those workshops I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we have to do, I think, is first, before you get into how it relates to climate change, you need to first think about what these words mean. It's equity, inclusion, diversity. I've seen them used very interchangeably, both by governments, both by businesses and daily people, but they do have their nuances and differences. So in those workshops, we do introduce generic meanings of them, but then we sort of say well, hang on a minute, you can't assume that they're all the same, they're all about the same thing, because they're not. And that's, when you link it to climate change, that's especially important when you're thinking about not only EDI in terms of acting on climate, ensuring everyone gets a voice, or that the burdens of climate change isn't sort of this disproportionate view. It's not just about that, it's also actually about also how knowledge is produced in the first place, and science, because some of you may already know, I don't know, at the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they are relatively not the most diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, and also general disciplines. They're very physical science-led, natural sciences-led, which is good. I mean, that's obviously very important. However, we all know that climate change is much more than a scientific issue. And any climate action will require getting in the social scientists, the political geographers, the political ecologists, the artists, the policymakers, all those kinds of people. And they too also need to come from very diverse racial, ethnic disabilities or ableness, sexuality, religion, that kind of, all those various diversities that make us human. Because otherwise we risk, I guess, putting forward ways to tackle climate change that aren't really holistic enough. As Martha mentioned about intersectionality, that's the whole premise of it, is ensuring that nobody is left behind or falls through the gaps, the cracks in policy, because that is unfortunately the case for many, many people in the world. So yeah, those workshops that I'll be leading on will basically discuss that in more detail, and also what people in the workplace can do about these concepts, because it's quite easy to just get a bit lost in all the theory and then work out, okay, so what next? What can I do about it? So that's where these workshops sort of come in. But yeah, it's I'm kind of looking forward to doing them. I'm not a teacher, I'm not trained as a teacher, so it's going to be a whole new experience. But I think that's a good thing at the same time, because I'm sure I'll get a lot of skills in that as well.
Thank you so much. And I think we have one last question, and this is to Kate. And the question is, what is the #1 action that councils can take to rapidly decarbonise?
God, that's a really hard question. I think the #1 action that we can take is to really communicate with everyone we possibly can that the climate emergency is an emergency, and that it risks disrupting every aspect of our lives, because potentially I think there's like I said before, I don't know if people necessarily think that it is as urgent as it is, or that it might be a bit sort of like far away, but actually I think being able to communicate that like the climate emergency is potentially will disrupt everything, give people the impetus to be able to take that to their own service, because me and my team are so small, we can't get into every service. We need people to care about it as much as we do.